Hey, how you guys doing? Okay, let's just check really quick to make sure everything's good. Good. Okay, the section that we're in, we'll be moving into doubled pawns after this game right here. But I wanted to do a quick rehash on this. Okay, what it is backward pawns share many of the same shortcomings as isolated pawns, and several of the anti-isolated pawn ideas also apply to this weak little critter, the backward pawn. Of course, the superior side needs to make sure the backward pawn remains backward, but once this is done, we have our old friend trade the minor pieces, pile up with the rook first, then the queen, and then attack with the pawn. We'll show you what we're talking about. This is the idea. We're going to get into our studies right here. I'll show you, and then we'll what we're talking about. I'm going to go to our studies here. Okay, right. Where is that? Come on, go down, down, down. Weak right there, weak pawn. Okay, this is what we're talking about right here. Oops, I got to enlarge this. Come on. This right here, same exact idea if a backward pawn were kind of against this. If there was a pawn right on c4, if there was a pawn on c4, and then we had a pawn on e3, I'll set up an example kind of similar to this here. I'll show you. Let me eliminate the board. We're gonna do it from we'll do it from black's perspective here. Oops, sorry, I did it right here. Oops, let me see. Actually, too far. I like that. Oops, not enough room. 1 second. And we'll just set up the kings for that this kind of a setup here. Okay, we're gonna have it be black to move. We're just analyzing the board. This is the backward pawn type of situation that we're talking about. Okay, see how the white has done one thing that's really cool. They've stopped the backward pawn from approaching the d pawn. They've implanted a rook there, a queen here. So let's say the queen comes over here. What white wants to do, actually we'll say the queen plays a bad move. We'll just say the queen plays d6 thinking, I'm going to slip in via this way here. I'm going to slip in over here. Now you can attack the pawn and win it. You win it because you attacked. It's very similar to the isolated pawn idea. The only difference is there's a pawn right here. There's a pawn right there. That's it. That's the only difference. Same type of setup. You get a rook on d4, queen on d1 or d2, and then you have a pawn like e3 to e4, and that undermines the d5 pawn. So that's kind of what we're going to be working on. So now we're going to get back and we're going to set up, now that we have that under our belt, we're going to set up a position here. Let's clear the board. Let's make sure we have this right. Perfect. Alright. It's white to move, so we'll make this a study. We'll put it in Reassess Your Chess second edition, or 2. We'll have to put the player. Make sure I have the name right. Just give me a second. Yep, good. Perfect. Thank you for your patience on waiting for me to look that up. Okay. White has a long list of imbalances. He has more central and kingside space, so white does. His knight is better than either the enemy bishops. Black's pawn on f6 is in need of constant defense. So pawn on, yeah, f6. Yep. So he's got more kingside space here. This knight dominates and is attacking this pawn, and the only piece that defends it is the bishop. His backward d-pawn is under the gun from the white doubled white rooks. And last but certainly not least, he has an extra pawn, h5, the h5 pawn. They are doubled on the h-file. Black must always be on guard to prevent h5 to h6 in the position where the rooks are exchanged, since then it would be like running for a touchdown. That's what he said. However, as good as that is, Black still is barely managing to hold things together. So let's see. However, as good as all that is, Black still barely managing to hold things together. Okay. And this brings us back to the point I made in our last example, which altered our attention to create the second weakness. Or so it made our attention. He's saying you have to create a second weakness, otherwise your opponent will be able to hold it. In general, a player can hold when one point is being attacked, but if you add another weakness to his or her position, then the added defense burden proves to be too much. This concept is often called the principle of two weaknesses. So we'll underline that. The principle of two weaknesses. Remember that in your play. I got to get a drink and then we'll get started again. Certainly, I'm spurning white on. He's basically prodding white on to find a way to create one or more new targets in Black's camp, which then adds to all the rest of White's riches should prove decisively. So what does White do? Stop now, and if you're watching this on a recording, stop. See if you can find out a way that White can provoke altogether new weakness that could be targeted. Stop now. Okay, if you want to continue, just keep it running. If you said A4, congratulations. That is the start of the weakening process. Suddenly, Black's queenside structure will crumble and turn into targets. The immediate knight b6 is not good enough because a rook to e8. And then a4 was also possible, But if you were looking at rook c7 here, this is actually a double question mark blunder. Oh, it's a mistake. Sorry, not a blunder, just a mistake. Because rook takes d6 and a pawn falls off the board. And instead of a4 for white, if he plays this move, this is actually a double question mark blunder for white. So this would probably be an equalizing move. Takes, and then king c7 and winning a piece. So you got to be careful. That's why every move has to be played out properly. Now the knight comes in and we're targeting that, we're targeting there, and we're targeting here. These are three targets, here and then there. Rook e7. Knight takes. Because remember, this is a mistake. Because why? Whammed. And you lose a piece. Well, I guess you don't lose a piece. You could play the... Well, I guess you do lose a piece, don't you? You'd be down... Actually, you would... Well, no, you're up in exchange. You're up in exchange, so... But do we want to rush that? There's no real need to rush that. That's always playable. Why not just pick off the a4 pawn, bring the rook back and the knight back to b6, and then snap that off. And now you're up in exchange and pawns. So I see why they did that. c4 was also a playable idea. King c7, c5, rook e to e8, e8, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook d8, and then oops, not that, h4 to h4, and this would actually be an exclam move and win, because what you're doing is you're drawing away the protection of the bishop. Because if bishop takes, then rook takes. Oops, not that first, because the rook would then intercept. If you played here, rook would move over. First you take here, there, and then now you after king takes h, and it promotes. There's no way to stop that from happening. And if instead of taking you play here, then rook takes f6, and now you're threatening to win another pawn here, and you're also threatening now to push. So you have so much defense that could happen. Theory of two weaknesses. The threat of pushing on h6 is powerful, and the threat of rook takes f7 is powerful, and you can't meet both. Because like if king, this actually, no, the move stopped here, but what I would do is play rook takes here at this point, and now you have three passed pawns, and if rook came over to stop that, he then can get this one rolling. And if the bishop came to try to stop there, you now can check here. If he comes up, or go back here. If instead of king c, say it comes there. Now you have an idea of a potential discovery. You can, if takes there, then you take there, and if he comes there, now you have knight here, and you're forking the the rooks. So you might not want to play c6 now that I think about it. Best idea is just taking and the pin, and now you're threatening there. So you'd have to move back. I'm even thinking about taking here, takes, knight there, rook up, check, there. And how do you stop these monsters? Yeah, you can't. It's just, that's just too monstrous of an attack. So knight takes a4. Okay, d5. Knight c5. And so they would have to push onward to d4 to stop anything. Yeah, d4, and then c3. And you still haven't stopped the problem. Rook c8. C takes, e takes. Knight takes b7, rook takes b7. And then rook takes d4. Now you've won a pawn. And then if rook b6 or b3, bishop to e2, and the idea is there's really not a problem if a rook slides over here. You have check there, so yeah, they're in a world of hurt. So if rook let's see, if rook c3, rook d8, check, king a8 is possible when bishop to h1, and rook c to b2, oops, cb2, and then e5. Brings the powerful bishop into the game, and the idea is this is attacking here. Yes, they could take there. King a1 is best, but most humans would avoid such a complicated line. Instead, rook instead of pushing the pawn, rook d, oops, that can't be right. Am I seeing that right? Oh, I got it. My bad there. Right here, this is what would be played. And then that stops everything, and it's good to go. Would win are in a far less stressful manner at this point. And so that's why bishop there. This this is a target here. It prepares to bring the bishop to c4 to d5 into here, and then basically dominate the position. So bishop f4. A seems a bit more resilient, he said. Jeremy Silman says, though it also would lose to rook d5, and a4, rook a5, rook b4, bishop b5, rook takes, bishop takes, rook h. Bishop b2 to cover that. When the threat of rook d7 is too much, these 2 points are just too weak. Rook d4 and rook d7. So after bishop f4, the rest of the game features white training for speedy to basically devour a pawn here. Speedy attack. After bishop f4, the rest of the game features white training for a speedy contest, as he basically, as we call Pac-Man's, one weak pawn after another. Weak. There's the first one that falls. Rook c6. Bishop c4. The next one's going to be falling. Rook b4. Oops. Bishop takes, munch. Rook c1. Rook takes c1. Rook takes d4. Rook c4. Rook d1, check. King a2. Rook d2, h3. Rook h2, and then rook c3. Rook f2. Bishop d5. And then a8. And black resigned here. There's not really much you could do. Now we're into, doubled pawns. This is what he says about doubled pawns here. Most players have a mortal fear of acquiring double pawns. However, we'll see in part 6, static versus dynamic, that they also have their good points, etc. Added control of important squares and space gaining power sometimes. Here we will connect on the we'll concentrate on the doubled pawns that are indeed weak targets to be surrounded and devoured, or Pac-Man eaten. In general, doubled isolated pawns on the open file are every bit as weak as you might imagine them to be. Okay, this is what he says. There are quite a few exceptions where doubled isolated pawns have a shining moment. Those will also be explored in part 6, static versus dynamic. Here's a game that we have to look at for doubled pawns. So let's do it to it. It's black to move here. Okay, for a short time I taught a young man that only played computers online. He told me that this handle was his handle was name was the Turk. Oh, the chess playing automatic. The chess playing automatic that wowed the world when it appeared in 1790. In one lesson, I extolled the kind of Maroczy bind formation, and he fell in love with the move his student. Unfortunately, his bind turned into a bust, and he found himself with a horrible pawn structure and passive pieces in this. In such a position where the superior side usually attacks the more advanced pawns simply because his pieces can reach it. Thus, C4, the C4 pawn is a target, while the C3 is also being eyed by the bishop on G7. So only one move is played here. Bishop a6. Since c4 is a target, black begins to pile on the pressure by bringing as many pieces as possible to bear on it. Black's the computer, and the turkey is white, and that's one of his students, and he plays computers online. So his student played f4, which creates a whole altogether new weakness, which is the e4 pawn becomes weak. But white was in serious trouble in any case, and one can understand his desire to be active. Knight a5. Now the piling up pressure begins. Simply threatening to snap c4, rook b4, bishop h6. Not a human looking move, but white's opponent is not human. This powerful move pins the f-pawn, ties the e3 bishop down to its defense, and prepares to create a new target in white's camp if allowed. G3, and then e5. e5 exclam at this point. The computer didn't exclam. If you notice that this creates a backwards D6 and a huge hole on D5, then you deserve a lot of credit. You're training yourself to instantly spot weaknesses over the whole entire board. However, white's in such a defensive position that he is in no position, he's in no position to reach these potential targets. Aside from increasing the pressure on f4, the main purpose of this move is to open the e file and begin a new target on e4, to begin to attack a new target on e4. Rook f1. Rook f e8, because remember black's getting ready to target a new target right there on e4. Not such but strong. It was only now that white realized that he faced some serious problems with his e-pawn. Bishop d3. In a way, this is almost sad. The light squared bishop is barely trying to hold up, is bravely trying to hold up white's whole entire position by getting off the dangerous e-file. Protecting e4 and also protecting c4. Sadly, it's all for naught. E takes f. And then bishop takes f. White didn't like the look of g takes f, and it turns out that his position were was bad actually, and like he used the example of like water. If you're ever in a rain, really when it's raining and you're driving and you have windshield wipers, you really can't see, but then all of a sudden when all you can see is that like haze like through there, that's kind of what it's like. This position is such hazy, it's so hard for white to navigate through that white's gonna basically run out of pieces to defend and then fall apart. That just happens. So if he plays here, and then d5 double exclam, this is a brilliant move. It's just, it overwhelms the position. E5 does nothing because knight to c6, rook b to rook to b, b1. Or is it rook b, b? Oh, bb1. Too many weaknesses, too many undefended pieces. Just too much. Bishop takes, g takes, and then knight to h7 exclam. The computer played knight b7, not h7, b7. Wow, I didn't see that coming either. The knight switched from the c, where it will pour pinned onto these squares here. It'll pour more and more pressure, as I like to say, on these 2 points. That's a really nice move. Queen c2. Knight to b4 or b3 seemed more natural. Knight c5. Knight takes, d takes, rook b2, c to d, bishop b1. And now humans would probably play f5 here, or queen to Huh? Oh, f5, gotcha. f5, then e takes, and then bishop f7 check, king g1, and then queen c6, and it's over at that point. Knight c5, king g1, bishop e7, f5, queen e7, rook f3, knight takes, oops, bishop takes, knight takes, queen takes, rook takes, and the c-pawn is finally going to fall. An extremely impressive display of target consciousness. I think it's time for us to say wow to the computer engines for chess, that they understand the target conscious ideas. Doubled and isolated pawns are usually their weaknesses. An open file, they can also prove to be problematic even when rooks can't reach them. The isolated pawns can and doubled pawns. Let's get on. We'll do another game. Let's see how we're doing here. Just hold on. Let me just check. Perfect. We had enough time for probably a game or maybe another one. Can't guarantee we'll have another game, but I can guarantee this one. Alright. Well, this is a really older game. d4, c6, c4, d6, e4, e6. Really interesting. Bishop d3, e5, d5, knight e7, f4, e takes f4, bishop takes f4, knight g6, bishop g3, bishop e7, knight f3, bishop f6, knight c3. Wow, white's almost fully developed. Knight a6, queen e2, castle kingside, castle kingside, rook d1, queen g4. Let's see. Sorry, bishop g4, a3 to stop the knight from coming in, bishop e5, queen f2, f6, and then bishop b1. So just in case if the knight were, if the knight were to come in, there's no target now. c5, rook d2, queen takes c, Oops. Queen takes C, B takes C, and then knight E5. Queen E2. White's position is basically a wreck. His pieces aren't doing anything. His king is still in the center. His e-pawn is backwards on an open file, and it's killing its own bishop, basically ruining its own bishop from any position. The c-pawn is being eyed by the knight. The e4 pawn, the e5 pawn by the knight. By the knight on e5. Sorry, and the pawn on a3 and c3 are both loose as well. A player schooled in the ways of target conscious would be happy at this point. Queen a5, and in comes the target conscious attacks. Wham! There's all these targets are coming. Simply the pawn on a3 and c3 are both threatened. Material must be lost. Please remember that I realize that Queen a5 is basically an absurdly looking move. The move isn't the point here. What I'm after is to train your mind to quickly take note of all the positional targets in any and every position or every situation. So this kind of looks, what he's trying to say is this move kind of looks absurdly odd. You don't really want to take your queen, like that. But the problem is this will teach you to have target consciousness. When you see weak pawns like that, you want to find a way to take advantage or exploit the weaknesses, and this is a way to do it. Queen a5. Rook c2. Queen takes. Castles. Queen a4. Having already devoured a pawn, Black decides to bring his queen back to base camp before it gets trapped behind enemy lines. This is a very human and reasonable way to play, but a serious look might have convinced Black that his queen wasn't in danger at all, which means he could seek more aggressive and produce more aggressive ideas. This makes good sense here since White's pieces are all rather awkwardly placed. Black's queen is still serving a purpose on a3 by tying White's guys down to the defense of c3. And it never hurts to have material plus and the initiative to boot. I would prefer knight c7 here instead. So knight c7 here is actually a much better continuation. The knight isn't doing anything on a6, so get the poor knight back into the game. So h3, bishop h5, tempting but wrong. Knight takes f6 is actually a double question mark blunder here. G takes. Bishop takes, and then rook e1. And the d6 pawn is weak. And the tactical freeing move e4 to e5 could be played, freeing the bishop, and basically everything's good at that point. Knight e8. Queen h2. Bishop d7. e5. Exclam. And the freed move we have arrived for a checkmating idea there. D takes. Rook a2 to attack the queen and threaten. Queen takes c. Queen takes. Oh, bishop takes. Interesting. Wham. And b7 to b5, taking control. Suddenly, white suddenly has a dangerous counterplay on the queen side. So, I mean on the king side. So you don't want to have any of that. No. It's queen a4. Black went on to win without too much muss and fuss, as he says, or mess. So takes, bishop takes on e5. F takes on e5. Rook b2, queen d7. So the queen's safe now. Queen e3, bishop takes, rook takes, rook takes, g takes, rook f8, and then bishop d3 to try to hold everything together. b6, rook g2, rook f4. Remember what we're talking about? Taking scope on the isolated pawn. If white can trade off this for that, then we have our optimum idea of again playing here and then there and trying to undermine this pawn. The isolated pawn idea. Rook g3. And then knight b7 or b8. He's trying to get his other pawn going. Bishop f1. Queen a4. Bishop queen a4. Rook g4. Rook takes g4. F takes g4. Knight d7. G5, queen d1, queen h3, knight f8, king up, d2, there. Slowly but steadily. It'd be tempting to play this. The only problem is then white potentially could be in charge here. They can potentially perpetual almost, so that's why they moved instead. Just be on the lookout. Rook e1 check. King g2. Queen d2 check. King h1. G6, bishop D3. Uh-oh. Yikes. There we go. Oh, I was right. Let me make sure. I'm sorry about this. King H1. King G2. D2. Oops. King D2. F1. Now G6. There we go. Bishop D3. King G2. Bishop E2. Queen F4. King E1. And H5. Queen C 8. Queen F5. Queen D8. Queen F6. Queen C 8. A4, and see he's getting the pawn moving slowly but steadily. Check. King H6. Queen takes A7. Check. Oops. And then he resigned. One problem with doubled isolated pawns, even if they aren't on an open file, is that the square in front of them is usually owned by your opponent. So you got to be careful with that. Let's see how we're doing here. So we probably will. Oh, we'll do one more. Make sure I spelled that right. Okay. Jeremy Silman's black and his opponent is white, so we'll just turn the board. Look at it for Jeremy Silman's perspective, as if we were Jeremy Silman. So Sicilian. Oops, I have the wrong knight moving. There we go. There we're good. Now we're on the right track. G6, castles. Bishop G7, Knight D5. Castles. Queen E1. E6. Knight F4. So he's shifting everything over. Queen E7. The old trick is if you're thinking like trying to prepare this here, I'm thinking that there's a tactical idea, if I'm not mistaken. Is it this here? Here. There. Let's try to figure this out. Bishop here. I think it's this. Here, here. Maybe it's the. I'm trying to figure out, because I know there's a tactical motif in this. And then after takes there. Something like this, but I don't think that's exactly right. I think that's the reason. I want to see actually potentially what the best continuation is. Okay, so. Okay. So it was a superior position for his opponent. Rook D1. Bishop D7. And then H4 to H5, and then H5. And then C3. Black has sufficient, has a significant advantage. His knight is happy on E5, and white's double isolated E-pawns can be nibbled on from the by moves such as knight G4 and bishop C6. In other words, they are clearly a static disadvantage. White, what's even worse is that while white has nothing on the king side, or in the center. The D6 for it. Sorry, nothing in the king side or in the center. D6 is easily defended, though white's pieces are too inflexible to even make play for it. Black will take control of the queenside, advance his A and B pawns. This means that black is in both statically and dynamically better. Oh wow. You never want that to happen when your opponent is that much better than you. Whoa. So b5, queen g3, a5, rook d2, a4 to attack the bishop, bishop d1, trying to get all the pieces involved, and then a3 provoking a weakness. Nothing wrong with bishop to f6 here. Bishop f6 is, but I want to create another weakness in white's camp. So black is, hold on, yeah, Jeremy Silman's black and his opponent's white. Sorry. So black wants to create another weakness, and so that's why a3. Sorry, I had the wrong players in my mind. That's why I played a3, is to provoke a whole new weakness. But f6, there's nothing wrong with it because it's going after it, but there's only one weakness that could be targeted at that point. Why not go for both? The more weaknesses you give your opponent, the mirror the party will be for you. So hold on, what did I? A3. Desperation, he played bishop takes h5. This is reasonable. b3 is actually a bad move here. It leaves c3 weak. The rooks will eventually move to the c file and basically hunt it down, and also the h4 pawn as well will end up becoming vulnerable to an attack. So out of desperation, white went all in at this point. G takes. The engine is even stronger than that. Was knight to c4 is actually an even stronger move when rook d to f2. A takes b. Bishop takes g. Rook takes a. I have no doubt that that is right, but I couldn't critic basically bring himself to gobbling up free. He said he couldn't resist it, gobbling up a free piece. So at this point, this here, and here, this is just total devastation. There's not really much that could happen. White's so locked down, and this could be played any moment for black. So it's not, oops, this right here. So it's not like that you're down anything. You're actually going to be up so much. So he just said he couldn't resist taking it, so he just took it. It's a free piece. Knight takes f6, and that frees up the protection of the bishop. b3, king h7. When white doesn't have anything nearly enough compensation for the sacrifice piece, the rest wasn't that difficult to play out. So knight f3. Oops, wrong thing there. Oops, wrong again. That's wrong. It's this here. bishop h6, knight f4, rook g8, queen h3. So he's just bringing everything to bear. Knight g4, knight d4. Knight takes e3, queen takes e3, and then probably e5 at this point. Knight f5, bishop takes f5, e takes f5, queen c7. Nice little tactical trick though. Queen e2, bishop takes, queen h5, bishop h, and then g4. They're trying their darndest. You take check, and of course you see this is a pure out double question mark blunder here, because you lose a queen at that point. So you can't do that. King h2, a to g8, rook f3, and then queen g7, rook takes d6, check, king h, queen g3, and then g takes is mate. So you can't really, that was just too much fun to play there. And so we'll stop here. Yeah, we're going to be going over. There's many different terms for this section we're going to be going over tomorrow. It's actually tripled isolated pawns. It goes by many different names. In Jeremy Silman's book, they call it the Irish Pawn Center. There's a lot of different names for it, but that's just the it's in the center. That's just what he names the section. So it's the Irish Pawn Center. That's all he names it. So it goes by many different names, but it's all based on tripled central isolated pawns. So let's just say not good, not good, not good. We'll call it the bad pawn structure sometimes. Sometimes it's good if it locks down, and you can actually defend them. You gain a tremendous amount of space, but they're just so weak in the end game. So you just gotta always be on guard, and you gotta remember that target consciousness, as we've seen in our game, the games we've went over, is a vital ability that we have to all master in our play. That when you see something like a pawn move, always ask yourself, it's what did that leave behind? One second, I gotta get a drink. Sometimes it's a square, sometimes it's the protection of a piece, sometimes it just weakens the king altogether, and you can set up to take advantage of that. It's just target conscious, and that's what we have to always keep in perspective, is that we see that and we do it. This is we wrap up on a summary like that. So just keep that in your forefront of your thinking. Is there a target? Can I attack that target? Is there a square that was weakened? Can I take over that square? And don't always go for the king hunt. If you gobble enough pawns, your opponents will eventually, under the stress situation, start making even worse moves. It happens because they just get panicky and they want to force the situation, and you can end up winning many games by just being one or two pawns up, and you go, wow, I didn't know they were going to play that. then it's actually a blunder and you win. So But that's why Bruce Lee says you got to take what you know and be able to apply it and be willing to do something with it. And remember that every move, the board will tell you what to actually play. And so you have to remember this, that inside of receiving the Lord Jesus, Lord and Savior as well, you have to decide, what does the board tell you to take this piece, and are you going to go against it? And if you go against it, sometimes going against that target consciousness will end up costing you the entire game. Maybe a win will turn into a draw, maybe even a loss. So that's why when I say you have to decide what you're going to do with the Lord Jesus, it's like the board talking to you. And if you try to do it without the target consciousness, you're not gonna make it very many times. So it's better to receive Him as Lord and Savior of your life, and be obedient to Him, than to take on yourself. It'd be like going against what the board tells you, and you wonder why you lose in chess. It'd be like, it's like there, the board tells you what to choose. So just think about that when about the choice to receive the Lord Jesus. We look at the board, and the board tells us to occupy a square. We do that. But if you go against it, you can lose your opportunity, and then the whole game is changed, and then it's over at that point. You had a winning opportunity and you blew it. And that's what happens. Someday we have to stand before Him, and I don't want that to be what happens to you, my friends. So just take that into consideration. Think of it as a chess move, your decision. Okay, and remember what Team Chess Cruncher always talks about is you treasure your victories and you learn from your losses. Remember that mistakes do not define you. It's how you handle the mistake that defines you as a chess player and a person. And our motto is that we hang up our coats, we hang up our hats, we sit down and study when most won't. Team Chess Cruncher does, and that makes all the difference. And as Wesley so says, serve the Lord Jesus, and as I say, God bless. And I'll see you next time on Chess Cruncher TV. Have a blessed morning, afternoon, and evening. Lord willing, I'll be back on tomorrow, and we'll keep pushing forward, onward, and upward, and moving even into better about the triple central pawns. So, you know what? Keep pushing forward. Remember what Hannibal Smith said. Even inside of a random position, there's always a plan. And when you find it, you get to say, I love it when a plan comes together. Same thing with target consciousness. Okay, 2 thumbs up. Hoorah. Be blessed. I'll see you tomorrow, Team Chess Cruncher. Keep studying chess and honoring the Lord. Bye-bye, team. Hoorah.